Hey, Paula, we have an exciting topic of conversation today, cash flow.
Absolutely. I love it when we get to talk about the money and cash flow. I mean, they say cash is king, right?
Do
Cash flow is
very.
very important.
It is, in fact, the number one reason why I see companies fold. If cash flow is
Mhm.
great and money's coming in, it's usually not the reason I see companies go under.
Yeah.
Now, it's the end of the year, and I don't know
Hmm.
about you and your clients, but with my clients, we are having tons of conversations about expenses,
Yep.
revenue, forecasts, projections, cash flows. And you know what? The number one thing that I always find is very interesting with my clients, and I
What
suspect
is that?
across the board, they all think their bookkeeper or their accountant are responsible for creating the next year's forecast and cash flow, which is interesting.
And keep talking. Keep talking.
Well, they're not. An accountant typically, I find, does more the compliance piece. And what I mean by compliance, I mean they're going to do your year end taxes.
Yeah.
They're not going to sit there every month and have a conversation with you about where things are financially, what's the best tax advantageous strategy, how do you grow, how do you minimize risk with currency if you have more than one currency you're dealing with. And then they think, oh, maybe my bookkeeper will put it together. But the bookkeeper's there to do the reconciliation on a regular basis, maybe give you a report if you've dictated what the report is, but that's it.
Hmm.
And so there's this missing financial piece when we talk about cash flow in the business. Do you find that with the clients?
Yeah, actually, I do. I do. Your bookkeeper and your accountant drive by looking in the rearview mirror. They're
Let
really
me
good
give
at telling you what's happened.
you,
Um, really poor at forecasting what will happen in terms of what the future might look like. And actually, one of the things that I find is a huge risk to businesses are companies that put a lot of financial decision making power in the hands of their bookkeeper's advice or their accountant's advice. And that I'm not saying don't ask those people, right? But there's a difference between a CFO and a bookkeeper, right? The bookkeeper puts the data together, but the CFO has a broader strategic lens. And so that's why you'll see, accountants and bookkeepers always want you to minimize your expenses. You're spending too much on marketing because they don't make the connection between the investment you're spending on your marketing and the 20 new clients you got, right? They were like, well, if you hadn't spent the money on marketing, you'd have so much more profit from those 20 new clients. No, you wouldn't have the 20 new clients, but that's a whole other. So there's a tendency, I think, for us as especially, as our businesses are growing, there's a tendency to kind of just pile more on the people or look to the people around us that we have trusted relationships with, right? Your money's a sensitive thing. So if you've got some people we trust, good accountant, I love my accountant. She's amazing, good bookkeeper, they keep everything organized for you. We want to go to these trusted sources. Sometimes we're asking them to do something that isn't part of their training. It's not part of their background. It's not the lens they look at our books through. And quite frankly, probably not the lens we want them to look at our books through.
there are some rare individuals out there who can do more than their title.
Oh, yeah.
They're more unicorns. They're not the everyday pieces. And if you haven't had the conversation, you know what they say about
Mm-hmm.
assume, right?
Mm-hmm.
And realistically, you cannot get to the end of your year and go, well, I just assume that my fill in the blank person, bookkeeper, accountant, whatever, is going to create the tools necessary for me to be able to make good quality financial decisions about what investments I'm going to make in my business in 2026.
Yeah. I have had in my 30 years that I've been running companies, I've had one internal bookkeeper who was actually brilliant at that. absolutely brilliant at that. She could put together reports for me. She was always thinking about what I needed in order to be able to understand how the business was operating. And she would come to me and say, put this together for you, or how do you want to see this, or what lens do you want to look at this through? She was incredible, but totally a unicorn, the only one. And I've had one accountant that would kind of have some of those future looking conversations with me about my agency. But again, only one out of several over 3 decades.
Well, it's a different hat to wear within the
Yeah,
organization.
yeah.
In both of our different specialities, there is a ladder of a
Mm-hmm.
rung. You come in, you're at this level, you're a junior person, you have this skill set, and as you get more experience underneath your wings, you can move up, you can go and you can diversify, and you can look at things from a more strategic versus a more tactical level. And that's true of operations. It's, the director of ops or the VP of ops or the
Mm-hmm.
the COO, right? And so the same thing is true in your financial piece. And so you can't expect your bookkeeper to do what your accountant does. You can't expect your accountant to do what your CFO will do. And you really need to, as a business owner and a leader in your organization, it is really important to think through exactly what you need to make strategic decisions in 2026, right? This is the time where everyone tends to do annual planning. Not everybody, right? Because not everybody has a December year end. But I find even the clients that I've got, I had one coming the beginning of this month, and her complaint was that every time they do quarterly meetings or annual meetings in the past, it has been very mechanical. We list it out, we have the conversation, we walk away with goals, we never do the goals, and why are we not doing the goals? And I don't want to spend the time because it is expensive to have 10 people from the organization come in for a day or 2 days and not be doing the business. And I don't want to do it again. Like, but you still need to do the information. And so this is a client of mine. And so, we said, can you share the financials? Because they've been really unhappy about sharing the financials. Well, we're good. We're good. Right? Like, but that's the first step that you need to do. You need to have a handle on where's the money coming in. One of the things I like to do, and I like three different categories if I could. The pipeline. Hey, kind of important to know how predictable that pipeline is. I like to know what the forecast is. There can be some sunny side pieces that I don't put in the forecast that I know are in there, but
Mm-hmm.
you got to know what's a reasonable forecast. And then the cash flow, because the cash flow and the forecast are not the same thing either, right? The
Mm-hmm.
the forecast is, I think this client's closing in this month, and that might be April, and that's great. And it costs me this to fulfill on that client. Whereas the cash was like, well, really the invoice is going to go out at the end of March, but these people typically pay in 6 weeks. So it's actually going to hit in terms of cash at the end of May. And so the cash flow and the forecast aren't the same thing. But that pipeline piece is so important for strategic planning. And Paula, I was hoping that you might be able to tell us one or two stories really about demand spikes and looking
Mm,
at cash flow planning as it relates to that, because that's a really critical piece that people sometimes overlook as a really cool way to
yeah.
use forecast planning.
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting because a demand spike that you aren't funded for can be a really hard thing, right? I mean, there's nothing worse than saying no to new business coming through your front door. But sometimes the right thing to do is to say no or not now, you know? Um, and you see that with particularly, service businesses get hit with this a lot because you're selling people and human beings can only accomplish so much. We have a limited time, right? It's not like I can send somebody from my team in for a software upgrade and that's going to double their output, and let's leave AI out of the conversation for now. But this just isn't an option, right? And so you get these demand spikes. You can either add headcount or you can scale back what you're doing to to make it happen, or you could say no. And so often what happens with companies is you'll get this, the big order that comes in and you ramp up for the big order. And um, I've seen this happen also with product businesses where, in fact, I had a good friend who had this happen. they they got an opportunity to go into Walmart, and so they ramped up production. They invested in inventory. They restructured their packaging. They went into a significant amount of debt to capitalize on this opportunity that went into Walmart to get them into Walmart. They weren't merchandised very well in Walmart. Wasn't a good match. Guess what happened? They didn't get the volume they needed in the first 30 days. Walmart pulled them from the shelves. They were left with this commitment that they'd made. So they had to, because of their production spiking, they had to run these like massive inventories, but there was no obligation for Walmart to actually buy it in the deal or compensate them for that. And so what ends up happening is now, like, they're left holding the bag on this huge expense, and there's no cash coming in to pay for that order. And now they're trying to get rid of it, trying to recoup their expenses. They're, it ultimately was not healthy for her business to do that. So you really got to think about, when you get these demand spikes, as you call them, that, what does this look like long term, right? What does this look like long term for the business? Are we funded to be able to do this? Sometimes slower and steadier is a more effective growth strategy.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you said that because it's really all about scenario planning.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do scenario planning well if you don't have the baseline data and information to be able to go, what if?
Yep.
And all of those scenario planning, you have to put your risk reduction hat on and you have to look at proper resourcing. And how
Yes.
do you make it as, in the case that you had just talked about, and I've got two other clients. One's about to show up in January on Dragon's Den. And so we're doing scenario planning because you're like,
Yeah.
it could be this, it could be that, it could be who knows, but we won't know, right? And so you're doing all of these pieces either as a product-based company or a service-based company, and you have to know what assumptions you're making. And that's where cash flow really comes into play. And back to what I said originally, your accountant's not going to do that for you. Most,
No. But
that.
you actually reminded me of something really important, and that is that um, your accountant isn't going to do the scenario planning for you, but it's critically important that your bookkeeper and your accountant are on top of what's actually happening in the moment so that when you go to your books, it is actually reconciled. And one of the things for me where I see cash flow killers that a CEO doesn't see coming is you have this high trust relationship with these people, right? And I made this mistake myself, right? You call, is everything reconciled? Yeah, 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 yeah. It's all good. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's all good. So you go to your dashboard, your financial dashboard. You see the numbers. It's looking a little better than I thought. It's all, yeah, 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 yeah. It's all good, right? Okay. And then a decision is made based on that, and all of a sudden the money that you thought was there because you went, it's not there. And you're like, what the hell happened? Right? Where did that go? Oh, well, I, reconciled and I had missed this and I had missed that. And they happened to be major things, right? It just takes one or two major things that, you know, weren't included in. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's all good. And you can find yourself in some real hot water. And I've seen that happen to more than one client, right? Placing an order for inventory, thinking that they have a better open to buy than they have. And somebody's delayed on their paperwork and doesn't want to admit it. So just says, yeah, we're good. We're on top of it because they have no context. You have high trust. And that is a real cash flow killer.
It is. And that's where you need the cash flow piece, because the
Yeah.
other thing is that you can find that, in the case of one of my clients, They had a month where it was a number of really large purchases that happened on an annual basis. But they could see it coming because we implemented cash flow look, right? And I like a good solid 4 to 6 months. You can see the
Yeah.
speed bump coming, you know what's going to happen, and you can plan for it. And the conversation really turned into, well, these are annual payments, but I'll bet you they have monthly options. Now, I know you don't really like that, but in the case that you have an issue over here or you haven't been able to risk reduce over there, you might want to consider making this a different time, like push it out a month. Make it monthly, in which case you're lowering your cash needed at that time. And doing that planning ahead made it very simple to just breeze through what would have been a problem month.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the owner's got no stress, and the owner is
Yeah.
able to go, listen, that's all good. We made these decisions. We made them for the following reasons. I've recorded the following reasons so I know when I look back 6 months later, right? And you reconcile it, what you're doing from your own information to your books that are being
Yeah.
maintained by your bookkeeper on a monthly basis. Does it all
And
look right?
you know, you can do that a really good way and you can do that a really bad way,
I bet.
right? So sometimes you've got to make that annual payment, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be annual. And what I used to do is when I had these annual payments for the agency, right, the big licensing fees and all of that, I would amortize them over the 12 months. And I would know that I needed to cover X percentage of that looming, I'll call it a balloon payment every month. And so I would take that amount and I would put it in a separate account. And so I knew that every month I needed whatever it was. I can't remember the number anymore, but whatever it was. So you don't have very many thousands of dollars would go into that account. And when one of those big expenses hit, it came out of that account. So it didn't hit our baseline operating account.
Yep.
The
Well done.
amazing bookkeeper that I talked about, the one who could forecast and everything, began to amortize them in the books as expenses every month based on how much we had actually used. And
Okay.
so I no longer saw the big expense because it had been collapsed into my QuickBooks. And so I went from, now all the money all of a sudden is sitting in my operating account. And that visibility has left. So I think what you really have to think about is the difference between your financial reporting
Mm.
and your and what you're actually doing with your cash flow, because that allowing that to kind of get collapsed really messed up my visibility into, and we had some real tough months where I was like, what are you talking about? We have this expense. It's not, why isn't it showing in the budget? Oh, well, because I amortize it. I'm like, great, but you haven't done anything to me. Anyway, yeah, long story short, you can really screw yourself up by trying to get too complicated, and sometimes just simple, so much better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go into the next topic, but we're going to have to wait and do that
Yes.
next time. And the next topic I think we should talk about is probably profit leakage.
Yes, I think so. I profit leakage and cash flow, they are very close cousins. And let's talk about what are some of the things people can actually do to solve some of these issues.
Two little peas in a pod. And
Awesome.
we can deal with that next time. Take
All
care,
right.
everybody.
Bye.